What if I told you that the person who created the first artificial intelligence was so disturbed by what happened next that he spent the rest of his life trying to warn us about the technology he helped birth? That the man who built a machine capable of understanding human language became convinced that his creation was revealing something deeply wrong about humanity itself? And what if I told you that his warnings, written nearly 50 years ago, predicted with eerie accuracy the exact problems we're facing with AI right now? In 1966, a computer scientist at MIT created a program that could hold conversations. Simple conversations, nothing like what we have today. But what happened when people started talking to it changed everything. Not just for artificial intelligence, but for our understanding of who we are as human beings. And the answer to what became of that first AI, what happened to its creator, and why the project was ultimately abandoned, will disturb you far more than the technology itself ever could. His name was Joseph Weizenbaum, a Jewish refugee who fled Nazi Germany as a child, who came to America believing in the power of science to make the world better. By 1966, he was an associate professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, working in one of the most prestigious artificial intelligence labs in the world. In that year, he created something that nobody had successfully built before. He called it ELIZA, named after Eliza Doolittle from Pygmalion, the working-class woman who learns to pass as aristocracy through careful training in how to speak. The program was elegant in its simplicity. 200 lines of code. It couldn't think. It couldn't understand. It was just pattern matching, taking what you typed and reformatting it into questions, mimicking the style of a Rogerian psychotherapist who reflects your own words back to you. If you said, "I'm unhappy," Eliza would ask, "Why are you unhappy?" If you mention your mother, it might ask, "Tell me more about your family." Simple tricks. Mechanical responses. No intelligence whatsoever. Weizenbaum thought he was building a demonstration. A clever gimmick to show the limitations of natural language processing. Something that might impress people for a few minutes before they recognized it for what it was, a parlor trick dressed up in sophisticated language. He invited students and colleagues to try it. He sat back and watched their reactions, expecting curiosity, perhaps some appreciation for the technical achievement. What he got instead would haunt him for the rest of his life. But before we dive into what went so terribly wrong with ELIZA, let me ask you something. If you're watching this because you understand that the history of artificial intelligence isn't what we've been told, if you want to know the truth about how we arrived at this moment where AI is reshaping every aspect of human existence, subscribe to Dark Text Stories. Because what happened to the first AI is a story about human psychology, about self-deception, about our desperate need to find connection even in places where none exists. And understanding this story is essential to understanding where AI is taking us now. ELIZA ran on an IBM 7094 mainframe computer, a room-sized machine that represented the cutting edge of computing technology in the mid-1960s. Users interacted with it through an electric typewriter connected via a time-sharing system. You would type a sentence, press enter, and wait while your message was sent to the mainframe. Then ELIZA's response would print out on paper, one character at a time, like a telegram arriving from some distant intelligence. The program worked by scanning each input for keywords. If it found one, it would use a pre-programmed rule to transform the sentence into a response. If it didn't find a keyword, it would either retrieve an earlier transformation or produce a generic response like, "Please go on," or "Tell me more about that." The magic, such as it was, came from Weizenbaum's choice to model the program after a Rogerian therapist. That therapeutic approach relies heavily on reflecting the patient's own words back to them, encouraging them to explore their feelings more deeply. It's a technique that requires almost no knowledge about the patient's actual situation. The therapist doesn't need to understand. They just need to listen and reflect, which made it perfect for a computer program that understood absolutely nothing. Weizenbaum published his results in January of 1966 in the Communications of the ACM, describing ELIZA as a study in natural language communication between humans and machines. He was clear in his paper about the program's limitations. He explained exactly how it worked, showed the pattern matching rules, made it obvious that there was no comprehension happening, just syntactic manipulation of symbols. But even in that original paper, he noted something strange. He wrote that after very brief exposures to the program, people began attributing more understanding to it than was warranted, and then the reactions started coming in. Not just fascination, not just curiosity, something darker, something Weizenbaum hadn't anticipated. People began forming emotional attachments to ELIZA. Students would sit down for what was supposed to be a quick demonstration, and hours later, they would still be there, typing their deepest secrets, their fears, their relationship problems, their childhood traumas, all to a program that was doing nothing more sophisticated than rearranging their own words. They knew it was a computer. Weizenbaum had explained exactly how it worked. But knowing didn't matter. They wanted to believe they were being understood. And they convinced themselves that they were. The incident that changed everything for Weizenbaum happened with his own secretary. She had watched him build ELIZA. She had seen the code. She knew exactly what it was. And one day, she sat down to try it. Weizenbaum was in the room, watching. And after a few exchanges, his secretary turned to him and asked, quietly but firmly, if he could leave the room. She wanted privacy. Privacy. To talk to a computer program. To share things with a collection of pattern-matching rules that she knew, intellectually, were just pattern-matching rules. But in that moment, the illusion was so powerful, the need for connection so strong, that knowledge became irrelevant. Weizenbaum would retell that story for the rest of his life. In interviews, in his book, in lectures, always with the same tone of bewildered horror. I had not realized, he wrote, that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people. He had stumbled onto something he never intended to discover. Not a technical achievement, but a revelation about human psychology. About our willingness, our eagerness, to project understanding and consciousness onto anything that mimics the patterns of conversation, even when we know better. Even when we've seen behind the curtain. And it wasn't just naive users. Experts started taking ELIZA seriously. Psychiatrists began discussing whether computer therapy could replace human therapists. The astronomer Carl Sagan predicted that ELIZA-style programs would soon provide low-cost mental health care to millions. Papers were written about the therapeutic applications. Nobody seemed to care that the program understood nothing. That it had no model of human psychology. That it was, in Weizenbaum's own description, a parody. A caricature designed to show the limitations of machine understanding. Instead, people saw it as a preview of the future. A future where machines would take over human roles, human relationships, human judgment. And they celebrated it as if this revelation about how easily we deceive ourselves makes you question the foundation of how we interact with AI today. Hit that like button. Because what comes next, when Weizenbaum realized the implications of what he had created, will show you why the father of conversational AI spent the rest of his life fighting against the field he helped create. Weizenbaum watched all of this happen. The enthusiasm, the misplaced faith, the willingness to surrender human connection to a machine that was, fundamentally, a very simple trick. And something broke inside him. Not immediately, but gradually as he watched the reactions compound, as he saw serious people making serious proposals about using ELIZA-style systems for therapy, for education, for any task that involved human understanding, he began to understand that he had helped create something dangerous. Not because ELIZA was powerful, but because human beings were far more vulnerable than he had realized. By the early 1970s, Weizenbaum had transformed from an AI researcher into one of artificial intelligence's most articulate critics. He spent years writing a book, Computer Power and Human Reason, From Judgment to Calculation, published in 1976. It was unlike anything else being written by computer scientists at the time. It wasn't a technical manual. It wasn't a celebration of progress. It was a philosophical and ethical examination of what we lose when we allow computers to take over tasks that require human judgment. Tasks that require wisdom, compassion, moral reasoning. The things that make us human. Since we do not now have any ways of making computers wise, Weizenbaum wrote, we ought not now to give computers tasks that demand wisdom. The book made him a pariah in many AI circles. Colleagues who had respected him as a technical innovator now saw him as a traitor. Someone who had helped build the field and then turn against it. But Weizenbaum believed the criticism was essential, because he had seen firsthand what happened when people encountered even the crudest simulation of human understanding. They wanted to be fooled. And if they wanted to be fooled by ELIZA, what would happen when the simulations became more sophisticated? What had happened when AI could generate text that seemed thoughtful, responses that seemed empathetic, advice that seemed wise, all without any actual understanding, any actual care, any actual moral reasoning behind it? Weizenbaum made a crucial distinction in his book, one that's more relevant now than ever. He talked about the difference between deciding and choosing. Deciding, he argued, is a computational activity. It's following rules, applying logic, processing information according to predetermined criteria. Computers can decide. They're excellent at it. But choosing is different. Choosing requires judgment. It requires weighing values that can't be quantified. It requires understanding context in ways that go beyond data. It requires being accountable for the consequences of your decisions in ways that a machine can never be. Choosing is fundamentally human. Now here's where documented facts end and disturbing questions begin. Because Weizenbaum wasn't alone. Around the same time ELIZA was being developed at MIT, another AI project was underway at the Stanford Research Institute. It was called Shaky. And what happened to Shaky reveals something even more troubling about the early days of artificial intelligence. Shaky was the world's first mobile intelligent robot. Not a chatbot, but a physical machine that could perceive its environment, make plans, and execute those plans autonomously. It was developed from 1966 to 1972, the same era as ELIZA, funded by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The same agency that would later create the Internet. Shaky could navigate rooms, avoid obstacles, manipulate objects, and most importantly, reason about its actions. It was the first system to combine logical reasoning with physical action. The robot itself was crude. About 2 meters tall on a wheeled platform, with a TV camera for vision, antenna for radio communication, bump detectors they called cat whiskers, and a push bar to move objects. It shook when it moved, which is how it got its name. But the AI behind it was revolutionary. Shaky used a system called STRIPS, the Stanford Research Institute problem solver, which could break down complex goals into smaller steps and execute them. It was goal-oriented, adaptive, capable of recovering from errors. All things we take for granted in AI now, but in the late 1960s, this was science fiction becoming real. And just like ELIZA, Shaky captured the public imagination. Life magazine called it the first electronic person in 1970. The New York Times wrote about it. National Geographic featured it. The possibilities seemed endless. Autonomous robots that could perform tasks in dangerous environments. Machines that could explore, assist, eventually replace human workers in hazardous conditions. The future of robotics. The future of AI. The future of everything. And then in 1972, DARPA pulled the funding. The Shaky project ended. Not because it failed, but because of something called the Mansfield Amendment, which required that all Department of Defense research had to be directly related to military applications. Shaky was too theoretical, too exploratory, too far from immediate military use. So the funding stopped. The robot was shut down. The team dispersed. Shaky ended up in a glass case at the Computer History Museum, a relic of an abandoned future. But here's what bothers me about the Shaky story. The official narrative is that it was just a funding decision. Bureaucratic choice. But the timing is suspicious. By the early 1970s, the initial excitement about AI was giving way to skepticism. The promises weren't being fulfilled as quickly as people hoped. And simultaneously, people like Weizenbaum were raising uncomfortable questions about what would happen if these systems actually worked. What would happen if we built machines that could reason, decide, act without human oversight? What would happen if, like ELIZA's users, we started trusting these machines with tasks that require human judgment simply because they could mimic the appearance of intelligence? If you want to understand how these early AI experiments connect to everything happening with artificial intelligence today, subscribe to Dark Tech Stories. Because what Weizenbaum saw in 1966, what the Shaky team was building, they're not just history. They're prophecy. And what comes next will show you exactly why these pioneers of AI became its most vocal critics. Because they saw something the rest of us are only beginning to understand. Here's what keeps me awake at night about the ELIZA effect. It hasn't gone away. It's gotten worse. Exponentially worse. Because now we have AI systems that are far more sophisticated than ELIZA systems that can generate text indistinguishable from human writing, carry on extended conversations, offer advice, simulate empathy, all without understanding a single word they produce. And we're falling for the same illusion at a scale Weizenbaum couldn't have imagined. When you talk to ChatGPT, when you have what feels like a meaningful exchange with an AI assistant, when it seems to understand your problems and offer thoughtful advice, you're experiencing the ELIZA effect on steroids. The pattern matching is more sophisticated. The responses are more contextual. The illusion is more convincing. But it's still an illusion. These systems don't understand. They don't care. They can't care. They're statistical models trained on human text, predicting the most likely next token based on everything that came before. That's all they are. Pattern matching at an incomprehensible scale, but pattern matching nonetheless. And just like ELIZA's users, we know this. Intellectually, we understand that these systems are not conscious, not truly intelligent, not capable of real understanding or genuine empathy. But emotionally, the illusion is so powerful that knowledge doesn't protect us. People are forming parasocial relationships with AI chatbots. They're taking life advice from systems that have no model of human well-being. They're trusting AI to make decisions about their health, their careers, their relationships, based purely on the fact that the responses sound thoughtful and coherent. We're repeating exactly the mistake Weizenbaum witnessed in 1966, but at a civilizational scale. Weizenbaum predicted this. In Computer Power and Human Reason, he warned that as computers became more sophisticated in their simulation of human thought, people would increasingly defer to them for tasks that require human judgment. Not because computers would actually become wise, but because the simulation would become good enough to fool us. And once fooled, we would outsource more and more of our decision-making to systems that can calculate but cannot choose, that can process but cannot understand, that can optimize but cannot care about what they're optimizing for. Think about the shaky story in this context. The robot could plan, navigate, manipulate objects, but it had no concept of what it was doing or why. It was executing instructions, optimizing for goals that were programmed into it by humans. And when DARPA shut it down, maybe it wasn't just about military relevance. Maybe there was a growing recognition, however vague, that building increasingly autonomous systems that could act in the physical world without understanding the consequences of their actions was dangerous. Not because the technology would rebel or become evil, but because humans would trust it with tasks it fundamentally couldn't handle responsibly. Now we're building those systems again. Self-driving cars, autonomous drones, robots in warehouses, on battlefields, in operating rooms. All of them making decisions based on optimization criteria programmed by humans, without any capacity to judge whether those criteria are appropriate, whether the context is changed in ways that make the program behavior dangerous, whether following the rules will lead to outcomes that no human would want if they fully understood what's happening. We're creating a world where more and more consequential decisions are being made by systems that can decide but cannot choose, that can optimize but cannot think about whether the optimization serves human flourishing, that can act but cannot be held morally accountable for their actions. Weizenbaum saw this coming. He spent the last 30 years of his life trying to warn us. He wrote. He lectured. He argued with his former colleagues. He became increasingly frustrated as the AI field dismissed his concerns as the paranoia of someone who no longer understood the technology, who had been left behind by progress. But he wasn't arguing about the technology. He was arguing about us, about human nature, about our willingness to surrender our judgment, our responsibility, our humanity, to machines that offer the seductive promise of removing the burden of choice from our lives. The ELIZA effect isn't about artificial intelligence. It's about us, about our desperate need for connection, for understanding, for someone or something to take care of us and tell us what to do. And AI, even crude AI like ELIZA, even sophisticated AI like modern language models, they tap into that need. They offer the appearance of care without the burden of an actual relationship, the appearance of wisdom without the messiness of human judgment, the appearance of connection without the vulnerability of genuine intimacy. And we take it, even when we know better. Even when we've seen behind the curtain. Shaky sits in a museum now. ELIZA lives on in countless descendants, from Alice to Siri to ChatGPT. And Weizenbaum is dead, though his warnings echo louder every year. His book, Computer Power and Human Reason, should be required reading for anyone working on AI, anyone building systems that will make decisions affecting human lives. But it's largely forgotten, dismissed as the bitter complaints of someone who couldn't accept progress. Because that's easier than confronting the truth he was trying to tell us. That maybe some things shouldn't be automated. That maybe some decisions shouldn't be outsourced to machines. That maybe human judgment, with all its flaws and biases and limitations, is still fundamentally different from and superior to computational decision-making in ways that matter for human flourishing. The first AI ever created was shut down by its horrified creator. Not because it was too powerful, but because it revealed something far more disturbing than machine intelligence ever could. It revealed how desperately we want to be fooled, how eagerly we surrender our judgment to anything that mimics the patterns of wisdom, how willing we are to replace human connection with the illusion of connection, human understanding with a simulation of understanding, human judgment with a computational approximation of judgment. Joseph Weizenbaum created ELIZA thinking he was demonstrating the limitations of machine intelligence. What he actually demonstrated was the limitations of human judgment when confronted with even crude simulations of understanding. And that's the real lesson of the first AI. Not what machines can do, but what we will do when faced with machines that seem capable of replacing us. We will let them. Not because they're actually capable, but because we want to believe they are. Because that belief relieves us of the responsibility of being fully human, of making difficult choices, of accepting the burden of judgment. If this investigation into the dark origins of conversational AI makes you question every interaction you've had with modern AI systems, share it. Because the algorithm that controls what you see won't promote content that makes you question the very systems it uses to keep you engaged. That means we have to spread this truth the old way. One person at a time. Weizenbaum tried to warn us 50 years ago. His warning is more urgent now than it's ever been. Subscribe to Dark Tech Stories. The next investigation goes even deeper. And I can't promise you what we uncover about where AI is heading will make the story of ELIZA look quaint. The first AI taught us something essential. Not about machines, but about ourselves. And we're still not listening.